Hey guys, this is Infinite Flash here. Today I'm going to be talking about the last game of round 6 of the Sinquefield Cup that was played yesterday in St. Louis. In this game we have Magnus Carlsen playing white against Maxime Vachier Lagrave playing black. I don't think I'm ever going to call him MBO. I just can't decide. Help me out guys. I really need help with that name. Anyways, Carlsen kicked off with e4. We get a Sicilian defense, and after a few more moves, I was pretty shocked about the opening. Knight f3. I'm sorry. Carlsen played a different move with knight c3, tempting black to play close Sicilian. Carlsen wouldn't mind these slow positional maneuvering systems, and after knight c6, white just decided ended up playing knight f3 when certainly black can play e5 with a very solid position for black. But instead we saw g6, and we saw kind of an accelerated dragon with d4, takes, or just a dragon. I don't know. I don't really care about the names, but just kind of a Sicilian dragon position. And I thought we were going to get these sharp lines with f3, queen d2, bishop c4. Anyways, bizarre attacks and mindless attacks, as that usually happen in the open Sicilians. And we almost had it with castles, bishop b3, queen a5, very normal stuff, like kind of activates the queen. He can also consider d6 or possibly d5 in these positions. I'm not too familiar with I'm not the, let's say, the expert on the dragon here. I won't claim anything like that, but d6 and d5 look more normal. And queen a5 is another idea, but the thing is, after f3, the normal move is d6 or d5 in this kind of position, but MVL plays e6, which strategically is not a good move, but due to concrete, because of knight db5 sometimes. But since the king is stuck in the center, white decided to castle, and you can see white's threat here with knight db5 at some point, trying to access the weak dark squares. But there's the concrete idea behind e6 that allows black to play d5, and in this position, black is probably okay. In the game, Carlsen continued. In this position, by the way, is probably really fine for black. By the way, in the game, Carlsen took the pawn here, and what black probably should do is take with the knight here, and after I think knight takes d5, pawn takes here. D4 is kind of not a stable point with this loose bishop over here, so probably c3, defending the knight a lot. Rook e8 gain a tempo on this bishop. Rook e1, bishop d7 just developing normally, and after queen d2, the position's pretty fair for black. I don't think he's doing that badly. He has his own share of the center, blocking this bishop right over here. Okay, and white has the blockade and a nice bishop supporting this square, but again, it's probably really fine for black. So instead of knight takes d5, black actually decided to take with the pawn, and the problem is white gets a more, let's say, a better version of the isolated pawn than compared to this position, where black has already activated all his pieces and white has not centralized all of his pieces. The problem with the game continuation is that after pawn takes, white played rook e1, and in this position, I think, not rook e1. I'm sorry about this, guys. White played queen d1, queen d2, of course. More kind of a more sensible move. Rook e8, trying to pressure this. Rook a1, supporting the knight over here. Bishop d7, checking the knight over here, and the problem with this position is that it's just concretely not. It's prone to tactical possibilities like the one we'll see in the game. In this position, white certainly has a bunch of waiting moves that he can try to play, but the one that Carlsen played is certainly not that bad. He decided to take this knight here, and in this position, if black probably just takes with the bishop, white can probably just play bishop d4, play against have a nice pawn, have a nice, let's say, beautiful bishop over here, and can slowly play for a slight advantage. And MVL didn't really want that with bishop. He wanted to, let's say, get a solid pawn structure over here, defending, let's say, not an isolated pawn here. But the problem is, white can play knight takes d5, attacking both the queen here, forcing the queen to move. It's already dropped a pawn here. You can't take the knight here because the bishop's defending it, and you're kind of forced to take this, but black would have this, white has this intermediate check, forcing black to take here, and after bishop takes here, black eventually took here right now. In this position, maybe white could have taken here, but it's difficult to say this in retrospect. Probably black would end up taking the bishop here, exchanging to an opposite colored bishop endgame, and black would probably have to defend with rook e7 in view of rook f7, wreaking havoc over here. I don't think this is that nice for black to allow. And probably used to play rook e7, and this kind of continuation might happen where white is up an extra pawn. It's not so easy, and okay, black is activated at least, and he shouldn't be doing so terribly. Compared to the game, okay, black doesn't really lose material, but his activity doesn't look as great as in the game. Although it's surprising. Okay, queen takes e2, knight takes here, bishop takes here. Carlsen ended up bringing the bishop back, trying to keep both bishops on the board here, not trying to trade into an opposite colored bishop endgame. NBL took the pawn over here, and in this position, Carlsen really didn't see anything better than bishop c3 trading into the opposite colored bishop endgame. It's kind of just him admitting, okay, I didn't really have anything, and I guess he looked a little bit deeper and just couldn't decide and couldn't figure out anything. That just sometimes happens to the best of us, I think. There's not really any great alternatives given that this bishop's just going to drop back, and this bishop will probably come to e6, and white would basically have nothing in this position. So after bishop c3, the idea is that you get this kind of position, and even though it's opposite colored bishops, white would have pressure here against the f7 pawn. And in this variation, black does not have rook e7 because the bishop is here on c3, while when it was on f6, it could, let's say, support the rook e7 move there to defend the f7 square. And in this position, black had to defend passively with rook f8, allowing white to play rook fd1. Maybe this is what appealed to Carlsen, and then after king g7, rook b7, and a good move, trying to double on the 7th, putting pressure here, and he can always attack this pawn too if he wants. Black decided to drop the bishop back here. It wasn't doing that much over here, and at least here, it kind of supports the role of bishop b6 check, kind of defending all the pawns here. It's just more useful over here than say on f6, where it doesn't really support any of the squares that are useful in defending. White continued with rook d7. Makes sense, controlling all the 7th rank. Black has to give this check to protect the pawn over here. White played king f1, bringing his king towards the center. If this was a middle game, of course, most people would play king. Most of the time, you should play king h1 here, but king f1 makes a lot of sense. Like, try to really trade off a rook here, and the problem is, okay, he manages to do this, but there's always these kind of tactical complications that white can consider with rook takes f7. But he just took here first, and the idea is that bishop takes here is met by rook takes a7, and white would have a passed pawn there. So this kind of position is not really ideal for black after white gets this passed pawn, and potentially the active king here just helps support the pawn. So black really wants to prevent the passed pawn from being made, so he took the rook and allowed rook takes f7. Now the king had to move here. I don't think he wants to play king h6. This looks kind of far away from the main action that will happen here as well. He can also play king h6, but I don't think this is kind of ideal, as the king just kind of feels awkward here, and it should be behind the pawns defending them rather than say up the board here, where there might be some random mating attack with the pawn pushes here and the rook cutting off the escape squares here. The light squared bishop can probably come in and try to go to f5 if the pawn ever moves here. Just an idea, guys. Anyways, that's kind of deep, but this kind of explains the logic behind king h8, which it looks passive at first, but at least it defends the pawns over here, and it's not precariously placed over here, say in the future. In this position, white decided to improve the king. You got to activate your king in this kind of position, bring it towards the center somewhere, but you can't just leave it over here on g1 the whole game. And MVL just decided to give this check. I mean, he doesn't really have any constructive plan against Carlsen's active rook, active king, and okay, he's down a pawn, but at least he has some activity along the file. And the idea with these checks is, I'm forcing you eventually to go to c3 when I can go to rook e8 and try to infiltrate over here. And after king d3, check, king c3, another check, king b2. Black just repeated the moves for a second. g4. Carlsen just has to advance his majority over here. It makes quite a bit of sense, and black decided to bring the rook into the game here. This is also one idea of bringing this check over here to, let's say, deflect the king from the c3 square where the rook couldn't go before since the king was on c3. And he's attacking the pawn over here. White doesn't really have another move than h4 that was played in the game. Black played rook h2, and after bishop a4, black decided to play h5, a bit of a drastic move. Another move that he can definitely consider is taking the pawn, but I don't know about this really. I mean, after bishop takes e6, you're kind of allowing white to get a really quick passer, and this rook is a bit offside in retrospect, and h5 at least allows, pretty good activity, and after g takes h, you have this idea of rook takes, and now this bishop is under attack. And, after white takes this pawn, pawn takes pawn, you have this pass pawn, but the thing is, and you have this pass pawn too, but black has his own counterplay over here at least, has some play, and the king is far enough to defend this f pawn from, let's say, becoming a problem. And sure, white has his pass pawn over here, but most importantly, black has his pass pawn. And the game pretty much, I thought Carlsen would have had more in this kind of position after bishop e4, rook h1, 4, rook h3. I mean, all these moves are very, very logical. c3, slowly kind of improving the position, making little moves, but black just advantages the h pawn, and it's very, very difficult to get anything in this kind of position, and the game really, really fizzles out, especially after this pin when black can start marching the h pawn here, and bishop a5 to attack here, c4 has to be played, and now h3, kind of forcing this pin to, let's say, trade rooks in this kind of position, and the game really fizzles out fast. Rook e6, h2, bishop d5, takes, pawn takes, white has to keep the bishop along this diagonal, and that's why he couldn't play bishop takes e6, but still, that's not really a problem. Bishop d8 to prevent the pawn push over here. King b3, king g7 act, trying to bring his king over here, or, here. Black has to get his king active. White already has his king active, and without black's, if black doesn't bring his own active king in the game, he'll lose, so he needs to activate it. King b4, all these moves look very, very natural, and, after king b5, black decided to, jettison the pawn here in order to deflect the white bishop away from the e6 pawn. King takes here, c5, and we saw a really, really nice endgame pattern by white here with king a6, king c7, king takes here. Now a beautiful blockade here, bishop e7, forcing the pawn to advance here, and after bishop c5 check, this is actually a very, very dead drawn position. If white plays king here, you actually run into a forced draw here. Black would just shuffle here for the rest of the game, and there's no moves for the king, and there's nothing to do with this bishop along this diagonal when it's always defending the pawn. All white has to do is defend, push the pawn here, push it to a7, and pretty much it's just a dead draw. White can't move the king and pawns anymore. He's just stuck moving the bishop. It's a draw. Very, very weird, I know. And if you play king here, the thing about this setup is that I think black would just shuffle here a little bit more. If white just moved the king over here, the idea is that I'm bringing the bishop back here, and if you go back, I'm going back here, and you have made no progress. And let's say if you try to bring, if you try to push your pawn over here, I don't think I really care actually, since I'm getting the bishop back here, and you can't really go back again because I'm just wasting more moves and you haven't made any progress, so you have to keep pushing the a pawn. And in this kind of position, this position is very, very dead drawn, and I think black would just continue, and you would probably have to move this here, but there's this fortress-like idea, since your king can never penetrate over here. My king is defending all these key squares. It's very much drawn. Anyways, guys, pretty much a very, very correct and good defense by MBL. It looked passive at first, I think, with this rook f8 idea, but he soon activated his pieces after he gave up the f7 pawn. A very good decision to, with rook d8, trying to activate his rook over here, allowing his rook to gain activity, gave these checks, and he managed to draw the game with pretty decent endgame technique. And say bishop e6, g4, and his rook came on the second and eventually gobbled up the pawns. h5 is just a strong move, trading off the pawns. White doesn't really have any better than g takes h, and this kind of position is very, very tough to win for white, even though he has two passed pawns. Black has his own h pawn to, let's say, divert this bishop and try to grasp its own attention. And combined with these threats of bishop a5 poking here and forcing white to advance here, there are a lot of weak squares that black can take advantage of, and, well, eventually you get this trade of rooks, and this is pretty much a dead drawn position. after we saw this very, very cool of idea with this fortress plan of this kind of way. Actually, they just agreed to a draw in this position, I think. After c6, bishop here, I think this is where it was drawn. Pretty much a correct draw. Not sure if Carlsen could have improved, but I think we should really give a, let's say, a shout out to MVL for playing a pretty good defensive task and activating his pieces there. Anyways, guys, this is the last game from round 6. Hope you liked it. This is Infinite Flash signing out. Thanks for watching.